Hi guys, and welcome to this final installment of my Alps restoration guide. In this video I'm going to show you what you can do when your switches aren't working properly. There are three parts to this video, one for each different scenario. First, switches that chatter or don't register properly anymore. Second, clicky switches that don't click anymore. And third, tactile switches that click, which they shouldn't. So, scenario 1, your switches are chattering or they don't register properly anymore. Especially with chattering or with only a single switch failing, this is likely a fault in the switch plate, which is a sandwich of contact plates that allow the switch to close a circuit when pushed. If it's not specific keys that are at fault, but a bunch, randomly, it's more likely a fault with your converter or the controller. However, first we'll want to establish that it's the switch that's at fault, not the circuitry. So let's test that with this key that's conveniently located in the bottom corner here. Take a multimeter, most are digital nowadays, but I prefer the more instant and clear feedback of an analog one, and take your terminals. Now, clamp terminals are also easier to use than plain ones, so just clamp a terminal on each contact leg, like so, and then push the button from the other side, like so. Now, as you can see, it registers continuity. If at this point the switch doesn't register continuity, or if it blinks on and off even when you pressed it all the way down, your switch is at fault. If it's not at fault, you can check the circuitry to confirm it's okay. So go to the PCB and follow the traces and see if there's any physical breach. Then test each section for continuity using the multimeter. If there's no continuity between two pins that are supposed to be connected on the board, for example these two ones, see, they register continuity, but if it doesn't, you have a breach and you'll need to solder in a wire to bridge it. If it's not your PCB but your switch at fault, there's likely a problem with the switch plate. There's several things that could be messed up here. Either there's something, a piece of dust or something, inside the switch plate that makes it trigger irregularly. There could be oxidation of the contact somehow, which prevents closing of the switch, or the contact leaf at the front is arranged in such a way that it doesn't press on the switch plate enough. The latter is fairly easy to test. Just hook up the board and push on the leaf spring directly with some tweezers or something. If it now registers perfectly, it's probably bent backwards too far, so it won't push back enough to close the contacts when you're pressing the switch. To fix this, take it off, bend the teeth outward a little bit more and stick it back on. Then reassemble the switch and see if it works now. If the switch still doesn't work, or if it didn't work when you tested the contact leaf, it's more likely something inside the switch plate. Take a can of compressed air and gently spread the switch plate parts out a little bit. Then give firm blasts of air into it, preferably from multiple angles. Hopefully this will dislodge anything that's stuck in there. Reassemble the switch and see if it works now. If it still doesn't work, or if your contacts have corroded on the inside, you'll need to change the switch plate for a working one. Thankfully, most boards carry at least one spare switch plate. If it still works, I'd swap in the switch plate from the pause key, for example, which doesn't really have a function on modern computers anyway. Well, maybe it does on Macs, but on Windows it's pretty useless. Similarly, you can scavenge from other keys that you don't need. If you don't have any working switches that you can spare on your board, you'll need to transplant from another board. You need to desolder the old switch plate and solder in a new one, which is pretty easy, and there's tons of tutorials online on how to do that, so I won't dwell on that subject. Scenario 2, your clicky switches don't click properly anymore. There's two likely causes for that. Either it's full of shit, or more likely, it was stored for a long time with something resting on the keys, which has warped the click leaf. First, open the switch using the method I showed in part 2 of this guide. You can still do this with the switch attached to the board, by the way. Here you can see the click leaf. The way it works is that when you press down the slider, it pulls the click leaf forward until it releases and slams back, creating a clicky noise. If there's so much crap piled in the switch that it seems like this might interfere, or if there's something sticky on the back of the click leaf that prevents it from getting pulled forward, you'll want to do a soft or deep clean like in part 2 and 3 of this guide. Then, after you've cleaned it, test if it works now. If it doesn't, or if the click leaf isn't sticky and the switch doesn't look like it's filled with more sand than a Cherry MX Brown switch, it's likely that the leaf got bent backwards too much. Take out the click leaf and take a cocktail stick. Normally I'd use a wooden one, but I seem to have run out for the moment. Anyway, slide it behind the leaf and push it upwards to make the teeth fold out a bit further. Be careful not to bend them out too much. If you overbend it, your switch will become more tactile than the other switches, and the board will have an inconsistent feel. If none of this works, you can try swapping click leaves and or top housings from another switch to see if that works, and if everything fails, you'll likely just have to swap the switches altogether. Scenario 3, you have tactile, non-clicky switches, but they click, especially on the upstroke. Thankfully, this board is rife with switches like that. Now, the cause of this is not 100% certain as far as I'm aware. I know this tends to happen with boards that are in very bad condition, but precise details are unknown. One thing that can be the cause is that the parts in the switches are misaligned and that the spring catches on the leaf spring of the tactile leaf or the contact one. In that case, and what I do as a first step in any case, is just to take the whole switch apart, clean it if necessary, and reassemble it. If the problem persists, particularly after multiple assemblies, it may be that one of the parts is deformed in such a way that the tactile leaf is allowed to be pulled forward and then released, a bit like how a click leaf works. Normally, these top tabs keep the tactile leaf upright inside the housing, but if there's enough play, I guess the switches can end up clicky. If this is the case, there's multiple ways you can fix it. A hard mod is to use some double-sided tape to stick it in place, or use some single-sided to clamp it down a bit more, but the best is probably to use some folded paper, which is a reversible mod anyway. The paper method works like this. You cut out a strip of paper, roughly the width of the leaf spring, cut off a small portion, and then you make a tiny upstanding edge like this, a bit like the one that's already on the tactile leaf, which you're going to slot it under. Basically, it's there to keep it in place. Then reassemble the switch and it should work fine again. Printing paper should be thick enough for this to work, but if it persists, try some thicker paper, see if that works. Anyway, that's it for this Fixer Upper installment, and that's the end of this guide. I hope you enjoyed the videos, guys, and see you later.